Shivani Gupta is an award winning entrepreneur, speaker, coach, and author. She is obsessed with passion, people, and performance and loves helping business leaders and owners get more from their business. She's the first woman in her lineage to work and moved from India to Australia at the age of 11. She has scaled many of her own businesses over $1 million and exited a business that she grew from zero to 5 million. So this woman is a powerhouse. So welcome, Shivani.
Oh, thank you, Julie, for that beautiful intro. Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
My pleasure. So I'm looking forward to diving into your new book today, which is getting people to step up. But also, I want to get to know a little bit about you. So, you are the world's only electrical engineer turned entrepreneur turned educator. So, how did that journey unfold?
Well, great question. And let's see if I can do it very quickly. I guess, as you said in my intro, I moved from India to Australia at the age of 11. Very typical Indian parents. We're not going to leave you with any money, but we will leave you with a great education. I was always very inspired by my father. I'm still very close to him. He's coming over later today to take my dog for a walk.
Oh,
My grandfather was also very instrumental. So, for some of the men in my life, the women were too, but some of the men in my life were really great sponsors of me and my education. And both my dad and my grandfather are engineers. So I guess I started in the footsteps of wanting to be like them because I was so inspired by them and set my foot into engineering. Didn't realize how few women do it. In fact, I was the only female in the 4 years at university in my career, and I
wow.
really enjoyed being an engineer. But I also realized very quickly that it was very traditional, and I probably was going to have to live in that role for a long time to get into any leadership role. And I started to get fairly fascinated with people. And one of my great mentors at the time, Trevor, suggested to me that it would be great if I did an MBA, and the MBA would give me some opportunities to get into other roles in that corporate world. So I followed his guidance and graduated from an MBA. I'm not sure how much of it I actually got, considering I was done by the age of 24, but it did really help skyrocket my career. So I then started to step into some leadership roles in the corporate world, which were great, and had an opportunity to work in some mining companies and manufacturing companies, which was great. And then had a bit of an epiphany when I went to Nepal. And it was just after September 11, and a lot of people had cancelled their trip. And Julie, I found myself in Nepal as the only person traveling there. So there was me
Oh, wow.
and a Sherpa and a guide and a cook. And it was the first time in my life that I'd had some opportunity. This is pre iPhones. And so had an opportunity just to be really still. And I found myself crying a lot. I found myself really connecting to these beautiful kids in Nepal, even though they couldn't speak any English and I couldn't speak any Nepali. And it was just the most transformative moment. And when I came back from that trip, I quit my corporate job and I quit my relationship at the time, my personal relationship, and I started my own business and stepped into entrepreneurship. And even though I still work as an entrepreneur, one of the things that I've done over the last sort of 20 years of running businesses is buy and build and scale a few businesses that you spoke about in the intro. And last year decided to exit a number of businesses, the wellness business, co-working spaces, and decided that it would be great to take a 6 month sabbatical. It was fairly painful. I'm not great. I'm great at stopping for an hour and meditating and doing my ritual. Not so great at stopping for 6 months. With
Wow. Yeah.
the only thing that was in my diary was like a yoga class at 9:15 and pick up the children, and it was like, oh my goodness. Um, but in that 6 month sabbatical that I took, I realized that what I wanted to really step into was to take some of my experiences and help business leaders and owners and really move from still being an entrepreneur, but also wanting to be educate people and share my successes, but a lot of failures that I talk about some in the book because there's so many mistakes that I've made in running businesses and running people and really wanting to educate and help other business owners and leaders as well.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us. I think there's such a common theme in there in terms of the space that you gave yourself and that enabled you to really connect with, I suppose, your purpose and your passion in terms of what you wanted to do next.
Yeah, and also, mental health is such a big issue for us these
Mm,
days in our
mm,
society. And as business leaders and owners, we tend to carry so much of that stress. And
yep.
we're trying to make a business work as a leader or as an entrepreneur or owner. And there's a lot of added stresses. And so I think our mental well-being, we always knew it was a problem, but now that we're speaking about it and talking about it, it's fantastic.
Mm,
But I think it's so important to take spaces each day. I'm so glad I forced myself into a sabbatical. It wasn't, people go, wow, you were so lucky. And, I'd planned for that. I'd spoken to a lot of people that had exited their businesses, and almost every single one of them said, make sure you take time out when you exit. Don't rush to the next thing, which
yeah.
I knew if I hadn't had those conversations with some really wise people around me, I would have absolutely jumped into the next thing. And then I would have rushed through it. And before we know it, we lose another decade. So I'm just so glad I took that time. And, I'm not even sure I would have circled back to being an educator, for example, if I hadn't had that time out.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's a really, really important message for listeners to tune into in terms of doing that. And like you say, we just get into such a routine of going, going, going. And you could have easily jumped into the next thing and next thing. It's what are we now? It's 2034. So it's
Yeah.
hard to think it's like 2034 in 10 years. But
We hear that, don't we? We hear that with people going, I don't know where the last 20 years have gone. Or we hear
yeah.
parents going, I'm not sure, I remember being in the hospital before I know it now. They're 18 and they're graduating from school. And, time goes by very quickly. And I think one of my learnings has been really to learn to slow it down a bit and really, start to do things that you really love and not do it because it's great just for money or great just for
Yeah.
because it looks good on a CV, and really following your heart and your passions.
Yes, yes, I love that. So I know the listeners are going to be thinking, how did you scale these businesses and exit like from 0 to 5 million in particular? Was there a secret ingredient that you could share with people in terms of how you did that?
That's such a great question. That's probably the ending of that. Scaled
Yeah.
businesses over 1 million and scaled one from 0 to 5 million. There was so many tribulations and trials through that, those couple of decades.
Mm,
As I said earlier, Julie, there's so many mistakes I made. Um, and I think one of the biggest mistakes I made was trying to do everything myself. When you're running a business, if I had 75 action items as in marketing, in HR, in sales, in leadership, in finance, it had my name next to so many of them. So I
mm,
think probably the biggest thing that I started to learn was I started to surround myself very consciously with people that were running great businesses. I joined a great organization called EO, or Entrepreneurs Organization, where I really started to go, I want to learn as much about scaling a business. I'm so exhausted trying to do everything myself, and I keep
mm,
making these mistakes over and over again. And by surrounding myself with really great entrepreneurs, um, one of the things I learned was some systems, how to systemize things. I learned how to deal with people. I learned how to do a lot of work on my mindset. So I was fairly good at that, but I wasn't great at, I was good at managing my well-being and self-care, but not my mindset in terms of, if I'm running $100,000 business, how do I get it to 500,000 or to 1 million? So there was different aspects of it, but probably the biggest thing, and the decision I made, and now I think, goodness, I made that decision almost a decade ago. I wish I'd made it 2 decades ago, was to surround myself with some really great entrepreneurs who were very generous with their learnings. They were very generous with sharing their failures. And, I could learn from them rather than spend again 2, 3 years making those mistakes and looking at how I
mm,
could apply, these very generous conversations and very confidential conversations, and how could I apply that into my business. And
mm.
one of the things that I've learned is I also don't need to invent everything. A lot of things have already been invented. So if I can learn from people, copy and paste it, and
Yeah.
add my 10 or 20% to that, not because I'm copying their work, but copying their systems, or if somebody's already got a recommendation in terms of what platforms they're using, or, how they're using, or which company they're using for their HR practices, for example, I don't need to go and do that. I can just learn to be gracious and park my ego and ask a lot of questions, learn from people, and then literally copy and paste and add 10 or 20% to that. So that was probably the biggest thing in terms of learning how to scale. Whereas for a
Mm.
decade before that, I tried to scale so many different things and failed over and over and over again, really.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's awesome. And do you find that if you ask people for help, they're more than happy to help you?
So much. And I think that the hardest thing we find, and I find there's perhaps more in women than I do in men as well, but there is this thing about, not wanting to ask. What if
Mm.
people say no? What if they go, that is a pretty basic question?
Yeah.
Like, I thought you were running a multi-million dollar business and are you stupid? And, maybe they wouldn't use those words, but their body language would relay that. So I think we have so many internal fears as humans.
Mm.
I can't think of one person. I think one person I asked for I'm now talking 8 or 9 years, who said, look, I'm traveling to Europe, pretty good reason, with my family, but I'm available in about 6 weeks' time. I even think about my podcast and the number of guests I've asked to be on it. Not one single person has said no. Maybe the timing didn't work and they said, can I do it a little bit later? A
Yeah.
couple of people even earlier. But people are so excited to be asked. They're so happy to share their knowledge. And I think one of the things we've got to get better at is putting that fear aside, because I think the worst thing they can say is, sorry, no, I don't have that experience, or look, I'm really busy and I don't want to share that. And I
Yeah.
think when people have passed that on for me, I've had some very generous people pass that on to me. When people now ask me, and my whole business is now called Ask Shivani, right? I,
Yeah.
I want to pass that on. I might not have hours to spend, but if I can help people put them in the right direction, or send a website to them or a link to them, I want to do that too, because I've had so many people that have and continue to be generous with me. But you're right, we have to be brave enough to ask people.
Yes, absolutely. And now let's chat about your book, Getting Your People to Step Up: 7 Simple Strategies to Attract and Keep Your Key Talent, which is so important and so hard to do. Given, I think I saw a survey where, was it 73% of Australians are thinking about changing their job? That was Gallup. I'm like, wow, that's a huge percentage. So, first of all, what was the catalyst for you to write the book?
Yeah, great question. I found that, and I also started surveying small to medium businesses as well. The number one issue seemed to be how to find the right people. A lot of my
Mm.
clients are saying it's so difficult to find the right people. I'm getting applicants, but the quality of the applicants is really low. Or they're losing their key talent or the high performers in their business. And sometimes they're being poached by other businesses. Sometimes they're leaving and they're making other decisions in terms of their career, or they might be leaving for a variety of reasons. And
Mm.
so everybody that I started to speak to, pre-pandemic, to post, and now, that is a really, really big key issue. And you're right, the percentages are huge for people that are dissatisfied in their
Mm.
workplaces and in their
Mm.
jobs, and they're looking for those other roles. So I thought, how can I contribute? What are some of the learnings I've had in running my own businesses? So I wanted to share some things that worked really well. I also wanted to share some things that I failed at monumentally, and lost a lot of money as well. And I also wanted to interview some other business owners and entrepreneurs and leaders who, in my view, whether they were small or medium sized businesses, were doing a great job. And wanted to also look at some bigger companies and bigger examples of places that we know, and kind of it's a very practical book. There's very little theory in it. It's very practical. And I wanted to create something for business owners and leaders that they could read. Literally, they didn't have to read it front to back. They could pick up a chapter or pick up a model in it, read some of the experiences that I share from my background, but from other really amazing business leaders and owners. And hopefully they go, you know what, I can put that into practice. So the
Yeah.
book was really written for people that was super practical, because they're the books I like to read.
Yeah.
And I wanted it to be something that would hopefully become a resource for business leaders and owners to really help them in their people. And some people will pick that up who are great at leading people, but they might
Mm.
just get 1 or 2 key ideas out of that. They go, okay, I'm not incorporating that. I could build that in. And I just wanted it to be something that they could apply straight away into practice.
Yes. Yes. I love the practicality of it. And when I picked it up, when I got it, it was only just a couple of days ago. We talked about before. I happened to open the page to the passion model, which I thought that is so awesome for people to incorporate in their interview process. But not only that, in like their when they're having performance conversations with people, and just general conversations with them to get to know who they are at the core and what their motivations are. So I absolutely love that.
Oh, thank you, Julie. I know I can see your books in the background. I know you're a thought leader and a speaker and an author yourself, so that means a lot. I found that people would come to interviews and they would say the right things, and I would go,
Yeah.
"Fantastic, this is going to be a great fit." And often, almost straight after the probation period was over, it was like they were a different person. And I just remember thinking, "What am I doing wrong? Like, what
Yes.
mistakes am I making?" I thought I had my other manager sitting here with me. Both of us thought this was great. There is something missing. And I hear this all the time in
Mm.
businesses that, it's really difficult to find people that are passionate. And so I started developing the model a few years ago and then started to just put them into interviews. And I went, I wonder if we could test for people. I know we do the normal interviewing questions that we get, and they're all fairly standard. Tell me about you and tell me about this experience and what did you learn and what behaviors that we have. But I wondered if there was a way to test for passion. And so the model was really designed and through trial and error, and I really started incorporating into the interview process. It only took about 4 or 5 minutes in the interview, but just to give them that model and say, look, tell us how you spend your time and energy. Rate your passions for me. And one of the things I found, especially when I said to them, "Look, I'm not expecting as the entrepreneur in this business, for your work to be number one passion. I really am, curious about how you spend your time and energy." And getting them to rate that, that
Yeah.
started to open up such great conversations. Like I remember this one particular employee who I was looking at in a management role, and she said, "Look, Shivani, if I'm really honest, I really love working, but my number one passion is my health and my body. And so it's so important for me. I set myself 6 monthly goals, yearly goals to run marathons. I go to the gym 7 days a week." And I thought, wow, this is fascinating. So it's really important from a flexibility perspective when I've got this person, that this person can go and attend the gym and the classes and the personal training sessions that she's really interested in. And then I started to think about incentives. So, that's not always possible in a business when you are working for others. But I started to go, well, maybe as part of the incentives, I could pay for her gym membership, which is
Mm.
what I ended up doing. And interestingly enough, because she understood and I was feeding her passions, and I said to her, obviously, I need you to feed mine, which is to be a great manager in this business and help me lead and manage this particular business as we grow. It ended up being a great partnership. And so the more I used it, the better quality of people we got. So I've now shared this model with lots of different clients who've then incorporated that into their interview processes as well. And I wanted to share that in the book so that people could have this extra question perhaps that they could ask their potential employee and that person, and hopefully get a little bit better success rate in terms of hiring the right person in their
Yeah.
business.
I love it. I love it. Now, I might have stolen your answer to my next question. which, so you share 7 strategies, but I was wondering if there was one that you think like might be your favorite or it might be the most powerful in your opinion that you could share with the listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the book's divided into two parts. As you know, Julie, the first three chapters are about attracting the right person, and the second part is about retaining, key talent. And so, probably in the attraction part, it's probably the passion model. In terms of the retention, my other real favorite chapter is, making the best of both worlds and around diversity and inclusion. And I think for somebody who is brown skinned female, worked in male dominated environments, was an, immigrant into this beautiful country of ours, that one of the things that I really struggled with was to really fit in. And
Mm.
so for me, I remember as a child wanting to, put on an Australian accent, which is now very inbuilt, seeing that I've lived here for a long time, but, wanting to change the colour of my skin. And I think with such diverse workplaces now, whether you're small, medium, or large businesses, I think as business leaders and owners, it is so important that we get people, whether they're from different ethnicity or race or gender or age, or it's so important that we learn how to embrace that. So it's something that's very personal to me, and it's something I really like speaking about. And I think whether you've got 5 employees in your business, they're all going to have, even if they're all white Australians, like they're all going to come from different families and
Mm.
different upbringing. And so it's so important to bring the best of those families and cultures and diversity into our workplaces. Not only do they make great workplaces, but we know that the research shows us, which I talk about in the book, that it actually increases your bottom line and your profit as well. So it's a great thing from a business, and it's a great thing morally, and it's a great thing in terms of the right thing to do. So I just
Mm.
think that if we can create workplaces where we're hiring people, where our minds are open enough to hire people, and being open to hiring people with really diverse backgrounds, we can create amazing businesses.
Yes, thank you. And I'll be sharing the link in terms of where people can get hold of your book and get in touch with you as well in the show notes. So
Thank you. I appreciate that.
that's all right. Now, there is one question that business leaders talk about a lot, and that is motivating our younger generation. It's a very different dynamic now, we find, and it's a very big challenge in terms of, often not everyone, this is very general, but, many have, a real sense of entitlement. They want to be paid more than their salary to actually do their job, all of those sorts of things. Do you have any secrets that you could
Well,
share or any advice?
I hear this all the time, and I think let's talk about how we motivate our younger generation. But when you look at our managers and leaders and business owners, this is the first time in history that we've got 5 generations in the workforce at the same time.
Yeah.
And so it's a big workload, and to really
Mm.
understand how to motivate them. And I believe that the younger generation have a slightly different set of values.
Mm.
I think some are fantastic, and some, being a Gen X, I know that there's been at times, I can become quite judgmental, and so can we, in terms of when we've got, Gen Zs, Gen Ys, and Gen Zs, and millennials coming into our businesses as well. And I wanted to share a business example, but I also wanted to share a personal example. And I might start off with a personal example. I had this week my beautiful teenage daughter who just had really heavy, serious period pains. She gets that every few months. And she said, Mum, I'm just not very well. And I said, you know what, honey, I think it's time that you stay at home. I think that's great, and rest up. And, nurtured her, made sure that she had some lovely soup and she had a bit of a sleep. She was able to catch up on some schoolwork, etc. My generation never did that. In fact, there was a pressure of, look, like, okay, well, so does half the population. Get
Suck it
on with it.
up.
I remember some days feeling really unwell, Julie, and I
Mm.
just pushed myself to go into work because that's what we did. And I look at that, being an example for this week, and I think, I'm not sure which model was right.
Mm.
I'm not sure us pushing ourselves in our generations was right. I look at my 2 teenage kids who look at me and go, my goodness, like, you guys work really crazily hard. You work really, really hard. And I think they've got a better balance in terms of their mental well-being. They're much more aware of it. But as business leaders and owners, we still need to learn how to motivate them. And they
Yeah.
are motivated with a different set of values. Some of them don't want to work, and I've had this with my millennials coming into work for me in my businesses. A number of them didn't want to work full time. They're like, look, I need to manage my life and my well-being, and I only want to work 4 days a week. So I remember thinking, okay, could this role, which I've advertised as a full-time role, could it be done in 0.8 or 4 days a week? And in a couple of those cases, because the experience of somebody that had applied was so great, I actually allowed them to work 4 days a week. So they want more flexibility.
Mm.
They also learn super fast. So they're saying, look, traditionally you might have learned, which took you 5 years to learn something. I can learn it in 3 to 6 months by doing mini nano courses or using technology. And so why should I wait 5 years for a pay rise? Why don't you give me the pay rise now? And so
Yeah.
I think as business leaders and owners, one of the things we have to shift is we also have to park some of the traditional ways that we manage people. Because as
Mm,
long as the people can produce the outcomes, and if we set them certain KPIs and tasks, and whether it's somebody as a millennial or as an X or a Y, whatever generation that they are, but as long as they can actually get the output that we're looking for, and we're seeing
mm,
this more and more in our remote workplaces, then I think as business leaders and owners, we have to ask that question and say, okay, well, traditionally I would have waited 5 years or 6 years for that person to have that pay rise. But if they're really highly productive and they're a key
mm,
talent and a high performer and they're delivering all of the tasks that I'm asking, maybe it doesn't matter if they're 26 years old. Maybe they
mm,
shouldn't have to wait. So I think there's a little bit of flexibility required at both ends. But I always say, look at what you're asking them to do and are they delivering what you're asking them to do? And if they're asking for more money, maybe the answer is no. But have you considered the fact that maybe the answer could be yes,
mm,
because they are perhaps a really high performer in your business?
mm.
And the other thing I've often talked about, and I didn't specifically mention this in the book, but I talk about this notion of marathon runners and sprinters. That in our business and our people, some people are going to be there for the long term. They're
Yeah.
going to pace themselves. And then we have these sprinters who are short, get into short, sharp, shiny actions, and they can run for 10 seconds or 20 seconds or whatever, how long the race is. And when it comes to our people and our businesses as business leaders and owners, we've got to identify, is this person a marathon runner or a sprinter or somewhere in
Mm,
between? Like, how do I motivate them? And making sure that your managers know how to coach people, making sure your managers know how to give feedback and
mm.
how they need to know how to manage the different generations is really the key in terms of getting key talent and getting them to perform really well.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Great advice, Shivani. Thank you for sharing that. And just in wrapping up, I suppose you've achieved so much in your time on this planet, and I know there's lots more to come. So, what is next for Shivani?
That is a great question. And, some people go, wow, I just turned 50. They're like, when are you going to retire? And my answer was probably never. Um, and I just feel like I'm getting started,
Yeah.
Julie. I feel like that there's so many things that I still want to learn. I think one thing I learned was my last book I wrote was more than a decade ago. And it was really, there was, when they say when you open up a tap that hasn't been used for a while and a lot of gunk comes out, I had to, I think the first 3 or 4 chapters I just deleted and restarted. One of the things I absolutely will be doing is writing more books. But I have a couple of deep passions myself around my family is to spend a lot of time with them as long as I've, got and
Mm,
get my kids through school and integrate opportunities, whatever sort of interests and passions that they have. I have a passion around businesses to really impact and help as many business leaders and owners around the world. And then something very deep for me is I'd love to contribute towards eliminating sexual abuse of children. And so I have a
mm,
really deep passion around that. I've had some of the profits that go from my businesses, including the book, will go towards educating girls in third world countries. I'm not sure how to do that, seeing that it's a very big problem in our world with
mm,
1 in 3 women and girls and 5 boys. But having experienced that abuse as a child, it's something that's very deeply important to me
mm,
to look at how I can contribute. So I'm also, doing things around longevity and reading a heap of books, and I've got my aura ring and managing my sleep because the longer I live, the more impact that I'd love to be able to have. So I have a list of over 100 goals that are written down that I look at every day. But there's those 3 or 4 really big goals that I want to keep finding time and energy for to try and contribute. So
yeah.
I'm not sure if that answers your question, but the list is very long.
I love it, Shivani, and thank you. And your passion and your energy, shines through all of the conversation that we've had today, and obviously through all of your work. So thank you for being part of Leading You.
Oh, thank you. And thanks for having me and allowing me to share my work. Thank you.
Pleasure.